Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Expanse Abridged Podcast series. Now we're in the book properly. We're on chapter 1, the first book, Leviathan Wakes, and we're doing the first chapter, which is with big boy James Holden. So, chapter opens with a bit of backstory. We learn about this dude called Mr. Epstein, really good name choice I have to admit in hindsight, who had a little yacht, even better. But his yacht had a sick motor on the back. So 150 years before in the universe, Mr. Epstein got on his little yacht, sailed off to the distance, which is quite fitting. But the idea was he invented the Epstein drive, which is used throughout all the books, which is always fun. And it basically was a really, really efficient drive for the ship. So Mr. Epstein got on his yacht, went to the distance, and you can still see his ship at a small percentage of light in the vastness of space. And that's this bit of the Epstein drive is important for the book because it really isolates how interspace travel happens, because the idea of like this super efficient engine is like everything else is kind of grounded sci-fi. This one's a bit out there, like not magical, but it's the one that isn't really easily explained, and it's just like the way of making sure people can travel around space really easily. It's quite a fun little thing. So we learn about that, and we learn that Big Boy Jim, is on a ship called the Canterbury, the Cant, which is 3/4 of a kilometre long and 1/4 of a kilometre wide and shaped like a fire hydrant, which is nice and sexy. And we learn that there's about 20 million people on Saturn, and the Canterbury used to be the ship that dragged all the colonisers out there, I suppose not colonisers because no one lived there, but yeah, people that live there now. And there's 45 million people on the moons of Jupiter, and one moon of Uranus has 5,000 people living on Uranus, which is the furthest bit of civilization, until we learn some Mormons, who are still knocking about, are going to build a generation ship and head out to the stars, which is a nice little tease, but we don't know anything else about it. Then we learn a bit about the belt, and we learn there's about 100 million people there. If you ask one of the OPA recruiters, now they're the freedom fighter terrorist dudes who are pretty based. And then you learn that the Canterbury is one of the ships in the Pure and Clean company that they ship water out to the moons, and they go to Saturn, pick up a load of water from the glaciers, and then head back to the asteroid belt and give it to all the 100 million, 50 million belters who are knocking about. And that's where big boy James is. So I get a photo. There's James Holden. I can't remember the actor's name, but in the books and in the TV show we found him, fit, good bloke, top boy. So we're with James Holden. James thinks it's kind of poetry that the Canterbury is a big old dying ship falling apart, and it's helping people kind of scrape a living off in the mountains. And then James meets Naomi. New photo. Now Naomi's very different in the book, so this is where we learn a bit more about belters, because they're all tall and skinny because they live in no gravity. So she's 2 meters tall, a mop of curly hair tied into a black tail floating around her head, and shrugging with her shoulders instead of her hands, which is a belter habit because they're used to growing up in spacesuits. So they have to kind of do big exaggerated emotions, which is really cool in the books because you hear all the stuff about like shrugging with their hands outside their head. But I think it doesn't translate amazingly into the TV show because like they look like mimes, is how I've always imagined it. Like every time they do anything, they've got to shake their bodies around to like, because that's how you do it in a spacesuit, because you can't see like a nod of the head or a shake, because you have to shake your body and move your hands, which I think it'd be hard to do particularly well. I think they do a good job in the TV show, but yeah. And also in the TV show, she doesn't have this massive mop of hair, which is described in the books, like she hides behind it, it's so big, because I think in Zero Gravity they don't have the budget to animate it, so they gave her this hair, which I think suits her, it suits the actress, but it's not the big mop. So Holden starts getting smooth, and Naomi's asking him about a problem, and James isn't listening, he's staring out the window, big boy Jim, and he makes her laugh, and then Naomi's asking if they can get the supplies to fix the shuttle of the Cant, which is called the Night. So the Night can't go into atmosphere. Naomi's asking to fix it, playing by the rules, and Holden's just cracking a joke and flirting, because he's a boss. And then we meet Amos Burton, Timothy, and this guy's a fucking legend in the books. He's probably one of the fan favourite characters, I'd say. And basically you have Amos shouts in, says, "Hey boss," and we learn that the only boss for Amos is Naomi. He's the helper of an engineer on the Canterbury, and even though technically Holden's the executive officer and there's a captain and stuff, when he says boss it always means Naomi, because to quote the book, it says, in Amos Burton's world, only Naomi was boss. And then at this point, she has to go do some engineering. Holden snaps her a salute, and she shakes her head and wanders off. So typical Holden, just kind of chilling out, enjoying the vibes. And as he watches away, he says he realises he never really gets used to the long, thin, improbable bones of a belter. Then he was going to go see his bit of skirt, as you'd say, in the bridge, but he realises he's got to do some duty and heads down to the brig. So, no, not the brig, the medical place, the other one. And he meets Shed Garvey, who's this dude, in his nice purring clean jumpsuit. And this guy's a medic, and he's treating some geezer who got his elbow pinned by a 30-ton block of ice called Padge. We don't know much about Padge. And at the moment, Shed and Padge are hanging out with a load of medical maggots who are eating out all the dead tissue, which is quite a disturbing image, really. Big grim. It's kind of cool sci-fi. It's something they don't bring up too much, but like I don't know. I think it's quite neat that the medical maggots eating all this dead tissue. And they're talking about the company insurance policy because Padge has had his arm squeezed, so it's been like amputated, and the maggots are eating the last bit of dead tissue. And we learn the company's going to pay for a replacement mechanical one that has like temperature sensors and stuff, and they're going to pay for that, but they won't pay for a proper biogel that regrows the limbs, so it'd be like organic, because that isn't the medical insurance, which is like, again, what we said last episode really about the idea of this being companies on the edge is quite an interesting way of looking at it. And Padge, he's a belter, so again, tall and fucking skinny. I don't have a photo of him. He says, "I'd rather have a good belter fake than anything those bastards grow in a lab. Just wearing their fancy arm turns you into an asshole." Referring to the inners, so people that live on the inner planets, inners, instead of a belter. And he doesn't want their fucking gel, basically is what he's saying. And he has to say no offence to Holden, because Holden is also an inner captain. So from the inner planets, from Earth. It's just like an introduction to like the casual bit of ethnic banter. It's not racism, it's just a bit of ethnic banter. So then, as we're going through, Padge goes on about the arm, and we find out that because it isn't a biogel one, and it's just got sensors and stuff, that apparently for the first few weeks, when you get it, it feels like if you have a wank, it's someone else doing it. So that's a big advantage to the arm, which everyone's very happy about, which is quite nice. Basically, there isn't really... There's a lot of stuff about like whores and stuff in the books, or like prostitutes, what various people call them. But they don't really talk about stuff like that, I think, later on. Which I suppose is interesting. Because you got medical maggots, you get loads of fun. Yeah. I'll think about that next one. Then they basically talk about if Padge is going to come back for the next ship, or he's going to have to be off for a while because he's only got one arm. Then Holden goes right on board of this, and he goes to find Adi, or Aid, who's is, I guess, bit of skirt, to quote the thick of it, or his lover on the ship, his fuck buddy. And Eddie's off on the bridge, she's monitoring the systems, and she's got a thick set of headphones with a bass line creeping out. And she's got the systems to alert her if anyone arrives so she can speak to them. She's basically cool and hanging out. He swoops around her to start flirting. She responds kind of in its full title being all fancy in her thick Nigerian accent. Apparently they changed the actress to be this like in the TV show. I put the TV show name up in the actress, like this, I think she's Norwegian or something, so big difference from Nigerian. I don't know why, unless they were worried people get confused with Naomi. But yeah, who knows, because Book Holden clearly is a type, so yeah. And Holden, he's ready to flirt, he's back on it. He's like, do you want to come around to mine tonight after the shift takes over, the next shift? And he wants to have a little romantic dinner, listen to some music and stuff like that. And she's like, fuck you, I'm not in the mood for sex. And he's kind of being a little simp, trying to be a lover. And he says, I'm not asking about sex, just some conversation. But she was talking about sex. And then Holden, because he's a wet wipe, and that's why you love him, is like, can we just spend time together with our clothes on? Which is a not very based comment, but you know, he's a lover, he just cares. She says, stop trying to turn me into girlfriend. You're a nice guy, you got a cute butt, and you're fun in the sack. Doesn't mean we're engaged. Then Holden has to hold himself and starts frowning. Which, you know, you immediately realise Holden is he's like a big puppy, and that's why you love him in the books. And then Ardy she's clearly riled up, and she starts laying to him and saying, She'll be gone in a couple more trips around Saturn. There's no point getting engaged. They're just here to fuck. That's it. And Holden's like, no, I'm not changed. I'm a free spirit too, honest mate. And she's like, no, you're comfortable here. And he says, no, I'm not. But he says the only people that go on the Canterbury are people that are wildly underqualified or seriously screwed up and have things to hide. And Ardy kind of realises he's been mean and lays off in bed, just wants some sleep, and we can fuck tomorrow, and she'll cook some food while they're on. They need to leave her while they're on duty, which I think is quite an interesting one when you start realising that, like, although it's cool in space, they're doing all this water stuff, you realise the whole ship and the company is a shithole, and everyone's there just for like a little bit, or like gap year jobs and stuff, which is quite nice. And then Holden gets cop blocked just as he is turning the game around by Captain McDowell, who says, "Oi, dickhead, come up." Got a photo of him. Again, very different to the books. And Holden wishes he gets boils and public humiliation because he wanted to get some pussy. And they go up to the captain's office, which has the vibe of an accounting firm's back room, which is quite... The description of the ship is always it's falling apart and everything's small, which I quite like as a way of like looking at space travel compared to something, say, like Star Trek, or these big open expanses full of screens. And here it's just like crammed in the middle of something that looks like a fire hydrant is a kilometre long or whatever. And it's just it's quite a nice way, I think, of introducing a spaceship. And then we find out from Becca, someone who looks like apparently she's only on the job because she killed her ex-husband, is they've picked up an emergency signal a few million kilometres away, or next to a non-charted asteroid belt. And then basically a dance begins where the captain is kind of like, do we have to go? Despite the law of the solar system being like, you've got to help people out when it's space, because the environment wants to kill everybody there, so everyone's supposed to look after each other. But you start seeing that, like, because the company's got tight margins, people get a bonus. They're like, do I want to go save people? And we learn, because the Canterbury's full of 1 million tons of ice that's been accelerated constantly with this like constant gravity. So they're at a third G, which is like the rate of acceleration for them. It'd take fucking ages to slow down, and it'd be quite painful, and also very expensive and time consuming. And then Holden realises that he's got to do the dance where the captain's like, let's sack it off, and Holden's got to be the guy that says, no, let's do it. So that when they go to the crew, the captain go, we think it's dangerous, but Holden said we should do it, and everyone can look happy, and they still get their on-time bonus. Holden's he's a little simp. And he is a little wetty, but he's also a guy with morals, and he says, we've got to stop. There may be salvage to try and get Dowell interested. And they go, right, we're going to try and get it. And it will take... They've got to flip the ship. So they've been accelerating back towards where they go, like pointing where they're going. They've got to flip around and decelerate all the way. And it's going to take 2 days of deceleration with everybody in a crash couch, which is like a thing to stop you dying from like the constant acceleration. And they've got to do that, and then they'll get them 50,000 kilometres away, and then they can take over the little shuttle, the Knight, which is what Naomi was working on. You get a lovely little quote where it says, if Naomi, the captain's like, yo, does the Knight work? And then Holden goes, Naomi said it, that makes it true, which is a lovely sentence, and something you hear like all throughout the books. And then they're like, okay, cool, right, we're going to go. And McDowell rose, unfolding to almost 2.25 metres tall and thinner than a teenager on Earth. And you realise he looks, one, nothing like the fucking photo I've got, but two, the gravity of like two... Because he's never lived in a place with strong gravity, he's always been in space. If he does 2 days of constant deceleration and like quite intense gravity on him to make this really heavy ship slow down, it's going to be really painful. And that's going to see like the belters, they're adapted for low gravity in space, and they particularly struggle with the application of like a lot of gravity. And that's like a big thing throughout all the books, like how people manage with all these G's, and everything's done on like how much acceleration, deceleration like humans can take, because machines can take like loads, you just weld it down. It's always quite an interesting one of seeing it's this bringing humanity in constantly, like their human frailty. And then McDowell is like, yo, be careful, and if there's anything funky, like just leave it, in case they're thinking they may be pirates or slaves, as we learned last time. And then McDowell's like, yeah, you keep yourself safe. And then the Rebecca, the lady that killed her husband, says it's a light freighter. Martian registry shows Eros as its home port and calls itself the Scopuli, which is like, whoa. Immediately, first chapter, you're engaged. You're like, oh shit, going to find out this low gravity jiu-jitsu ninja is going to be there, and the face on a stick that says help me. It's very exciting, very, very exciting.